sir.
Okay, good morning. I'll call the Truckee River Flood Management Authority to order for Friday, December the 8th. With the roll call, please.
Thank you, sir. Chair Smith.
Here.
Vice Chair Hartung.
Present?
Director Bob Zine. Director Herman.
Here.
And Director McKenzie.
Here.
We have a quorum, sir. Director Martini is absent.
Okay, if you'll all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Danielle, would you lead us in the pledge this morning? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'll open up the public comment. Anybody in the public wishing to speak at this time? Anybody over there? In the middle? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority and we'll move to number C, approval of the agenda for December the 8th.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Sorry, sir. I didn't catch who made the motion.
Mr. Hartung and Mr. Bob Zine. Okay, no further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Approval, D, approval of draft minutes of September the 8th and November 14th. Any changes or,
Motion to approve.
Second.
okay, we have a motion, second. Did you get that? Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, announcements and clippings. Jay?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any announcements for today, except for we attended an I've got a needs committee yesterday, and it was a really good meeting, but no new announcements.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we should wait all that.
I know it. Okay, number 2, discussion and update on the status of the Flood Control Project Needs Committee. Are you going to be able to talk, Jay, or?
No, I'm going to defer to Mike.
Okay,
He's asked me to do that this morning.
Mr. Olds.
Jay, we'd like you to do it in sign language.
Can't do that.
So the Flood Control Needs Project Needs Committee has held a couple of meetings now, has made some important decisions that, I guess as a general theme, what they're attempting to do for purposes of planning the financing, they are looking at various aspects of the project to try to get the cost as low as possible. Their concern is the likelihood of any tax passing in the current political climate. And so they're making their best attempt to either eliminate the need for an additional tax and build the project just with our existing tax stream and with a flood protection fee, or to keep that tax as low as possible. In the past several meetings, they have voted on some assumptions that we are asked to use in calculating the cost of the project and accordingly the income stream need. One of those is they've asked us to assume a construction period of 25 years, which is longer than that which the board asked us to consider. That, of course, lowers the yearly amount that's needed to build the project. The overall price goes up, but lowers the need for the annual tax. They asked us to assume that we will receive the federal contribution of $180 million. That's been a little bit of a planning challenge because it's impossible to say when that money will come in. So we've made some assumptions in doing that. There are some political uncertainties with that, as you well know, and in past planning, we have not included those amounts in making the estimates of the amount of income that would be needed to build the project. So that's another major change. Yesterday, they voted and asked that the cost estimate be revised to not include certain of the downtown Reno bridges, which is a significant cost savings. The one that will remain in is Lake Street, but they ask us to assume that there will be an RTC contribution to that of approximately 1/2.
I know.
Also, in the process of working through some of their questions, we did get some good news in that cost estimate. One, the construction contingency has lowered from 38% to 27%, is that correct, Jay? And that was in light of some changes that the Corps of Engineers has made to their policy since we did our initial planning. And that was, I believe, a $22 million savings just by that one alone. The other good news is that our cost share for the Corps of Engineers study is approximately $7 million less than we had assumed in our planning. We'd assumed a 50-50 split. In fact, they're calculating that with a more beneficial split to us. We've included that in the planning. We're going to include that in the planning. We're being careful, however. We're going to confirm that the Corps is doing that correctly. We don't want to make that $7 million go away for planning purposes and have it reappear in a few years. The next meeting is going to be December 21st. That's when they take up the issue of the fee in earnest. We do anticipate that there will be a significant presence from the owners of properties in the Sparks and Reno industrial areas to weigh in on that. There is a dual concern on the board, both with the perception that the people who benefit the most will pay their fair share for the project, but also realizing that there is going to be a breaking point at some level where it's no longer financially beneficial for the people who own those properties to have the flood project. So that's going to be interesting. Until now, we have not really had heavy involvement from those property owners. We expect that to begin. So that's where we're at now, if you have any questions.
Questions or comments?
The airport example.
Oh, yes, the airport yesterday
Yeah.
did touch on that. They pay, and it was just on the flood insurance issue, and stated that they pay, it was $20,000 a year for $25 million worth of coverage. Taking a $12 per 1,000 square foot fee estimate, that would be 3 times their flood insurance, about $60,000 a year. And so that's going to be a point of discussion for sure, hitting that sweet spot. Now, certainly their benefit is not only their flood insurance, but that's going to be a major component of that and one that's going to be looked at closely. So anticipate that to be a hot topic for probably the next couple of meetings, I would guess.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a comment and then a comment/question about the airport. First of all, it seems to me as if they're making a number of assumptions, which is breaking the first rule of engineering, which is never assume anything. And I think we can get ourselves into trouble making assumptions. So that's just it's a comment, no answer required. With respect to the airport, I'm not surprised that the airport itself, that their flood insurance premiums are relatively low. It's flat land. It's not like they have houses covering it or industrial property with millions of dollars of stock. Inventory, exactly. Yes, thank you. So while I recognize that they may not want to play in terms of what their actual benefit is, how do we cut them out? Can we just build a wall around them?
Well, and yeah,
And let them flood?
I will
And
say that
not anybody
they-
else? I mean, that's obviously not.
Right, yeah, we can't. Well, and I will say, they did not express
There you go.
any, they just gave us the facts. Just said, I looked into this is what the numbers are, and obviously we're going to have to discuss this more. They didn't express any kind of attitude that,
Right.
You can't do the fee,
Okay.
or it's not worth moving forward.
Okay.
They were just, it was a question that came up in the last meeting, and they looked into it. So it'll just, like I said, the discussion really comes in earnest in the next several meetings.
Sure. Okay.
So, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see where the opinion of the breaking point is for these property owners. At what point do they just say,
And-
look, we're better off without the project at that number?
and the timing of the benefits.
And again, you know, yes, and there's going to be a very, something that hasn't been discussed is the timing of the fee. Because the fee, unlike a tax, you just don't say, okay, here's a fee, we're going to start charging it. There are timing issues. Someone has to be receiving a benefit or is, you know, very likely or very certain to receive the benefit in the very near future.
Well,
And
but
so then that gives us, you know, some planning challenges. You know, when do you say the fee is going to kick in? And but we know for sure there's going to be a period of time where the fee is not there.
sure.
You know, and how much can we get done and get a benefit to these people so that we can start charging the fee? So we're looking at all of that, and John Sherman's done an excellent job of kind of estimating that. We'll have to be careful.
And look, fees and taxes, everybody knows this, they're never fair. I'll use a perfect example, and this is not picking on RTC. RIF fees. They assume that a single-family dwelling generates 10 trips per day. Okay, well, if I buy a house, it's just my wife and I know I don't generate 10 trips per day. But they make that assumption that every house is going to generate 10 trips per
Right,
day.
it's averaged.
It's an average. That's right.
And that's a problem with fees that we're going to have to address. And in the discussions that we have had, I've been carefully advocating to keep as much discretion in this board as possible.
Sure.
And to not tie your hands too much, because there's a lot we can't see. And it would be a very bad situation to have them hand something down that is unenforceable. And then we're in a really bad strait. I think that there's a possibility from discussions that if they determine that they don't need a tax, that they're not going to recommend a ballot question, that they will simply send the fee issue back to this board so that you will maintain complete discretion over it. And I think that would be the best of both worlds if they go that path. So, but of course, as you recall under the bill, if they do recommend a tax, then they must also recommend a fee. And what they get to recommend is the rate and the duration of that. So,
Well, you know,
interesting questions coming.
It's a well-known fact that everybody loves taxes as long as somebody else pays them.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's kind of, you know, look, I don't want to have to pay for flood down there because, you know, it doesn't affect me, but it does affect, it affects everyone. Whether the airport thinks it affects them, and I'm not trying to pick them out and single them out of the crowd, it affects them. If businesses can't do business, you know, the cargo portion of their operation, it fails dramatically. And now all of a sudden, they don't have the level of freight moving in and out of the airport that they had because, you know, there's no commerce that's occurring. So it affects everyone, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. This is a tough conversation, and I applaud them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. You know, I think you're right. The discussion is going to be lively, and the airport is just one example of businesses out there that are not going to be happy about it. But I was at the meeting yesterday, and I think it was your agenda item number 3, I'm not sure, and it talked about eliminating parts of the project. That committee does not have the ability to do that. Even taking the bridges out would have to come back to this board. How they can control us is saying, you're only getting $200 million to build a project.
That's right.
A $425 million project. That's how they control us, but as far as taking elements out, they do not have that authority, and you might want to tell them that.
Well, we've had that conversation, and they are aware of that. We've had that conversation on a couple of occasions. That at the end of the day, all they get to do is say, here's this much money, and the board, you know, can move the elements around however they want to.
Right.
But they, you know, I guess like I said, for purposes of saying, okay, so how much money, they're starting to move the pieces around. If you do it different, if you could find a way to build it faster, or, you know, say, we're not worried about Lake Street Bridge, we want this bridge, we're going to, you know, you could do whatever you want. They cannot tie your hands in
Right.
any way as to the elements of the project, to the construction duration, any of those elements.
I'm not saying that taking the bridges out is a bad idea. Somebody's
Right.
got to pay for it down the road. Now, the 25 years to build this project, to me, is ridiculous. We could have 10 floods in that amount of time. or more. And if the project is $425 million for 25 years or $200 million for 25 years, if they're going to lower that, and I don't know that they are, to where they're going to go, we should build this thing in 10 or 15 years at the very most. 25 years is just, well, I'll be dead, but it's ridiculous. We need to, we're charged with providing flood protection. So we'll just see where this goes. I'm just not happy with that 25 years.
Understood.
Mr. Chair, if I might add one more point, and that is by 50,000-foot observation, you'll notice that the Needs Committee is introducing a lot of risk into the funding question. Risk, like Mike had said, concerning the federal infusion of money, whether we get that, how we get it. Their removal of the bridges was contingent upon the fact that they felt that the RTC might fund some of these bridges in later years. Again, that's still introducing risk into the financial equation, because the risk is whether RTC board will vote to do that in 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, depending on when that bridge gets done. And the mere fact that on the Lake Street Bridge, the Lake Street Bridge was probably the least of the bridges that RTC was prioritizing for downtown. They were prioritizing Sierra first, possibly Center for second, or Arlington, which doesn't impact the flood project, and the last was Lake. The thought, though, was that if we come with half of the funds, the flood board comes with half the funds, that maybe they'll move the priority for Lake Bridge up. The reason why Lake was included by the committee was because, on my recommendation, it's the worst hydraulic bridge that we have downtown, and therefore there's a need to do that. Obviously, Virginia was number one, but then the next one is Lake. But again, it's introducing a risk into the funding equation. We, as staff, tried to give you a bulletproof estimate that you can build this under any circumstances given this particular estimate. This committee is going the other direction by introducing this risk, and it is what it is. That's what they're doing. And by observation, I just informed the board of that, so.
Okay. Another problem I have, and I'll finish up my comments, is, yes, that Lake Street Bridge needs to be repaired, but diverting funds from the biggest danger we have out there, which is the industrial center, we've got to do something to protect that, and then do the bridges. If we take the bridges out, and RTC has scheduled for 2040, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
They have a time frame, 2027 through 2040. So, but it looks to me like they're trying to move that up, and that's what I have an issue with.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case, and, excuse me, I'm sorry.
That was
I'm not sure that's
my
necessarily
takeaway.
the
Kazmierski said the same thing. No, same time frame.
Right, and even if that were the case, they can't do that.
No, they can't.
So they'd come back to you and say, here's your money.
Yeah.
And then that would be your decision.
Right,
So,
right.
that was not my impression, that they were really attempting to move that up. I think maybe trying to make it more certain, because of course RTC's planning is, especially that far out, is very fluid.
Right, right.
So I think that's what they were looking more for, a commitment from RTC that in that time frame it would happen.
Okay.
Than anything. That was my impression.
Jay?
Mr. Chair, I can address that issue. The reason why Lake Street was put in early in the mix of priorities was because the permitting for the Meadows portion, which lies east of 395 and down to Vista, the Meadows portion of the federal portion of the project, the permitting is going to be a long, drawn-out process. It's going to require probably years of negotiation with the state, with the federal agencies, and therefore, it was not assumed, but it's the likelihood that getting permits for a bridge would be maybe somewhat easier than getting the permit for the overall Meadows portion. So maybe if we had funding and remember this prioritization was assuming we had the funding, we could do that Lake Street Bridge, provide a lot of benefits to downtown, get that moving because of the permitting would be easier for that while we're still working on the permitting and all the work that has to be done on the Meadows portion. There's a lot of flood walls, a lot of levees and things. So that's kind of the reason why it filtered in there. It could move back any way as the board would see fit. It just became a convenient prioritization for that.
And just to be clear, I'm not against building any of those bridges as long as we have the funding for it.
Right.
Mr. McKenzie.
Yeah, and I'm getting a little concerned about the direction they're going and whether we're even going to meet the minimum requirements to get the federal match.
The federal match is only for the Meadows portion of the project. All of the elements that lie west of 395 are not influenced at all by the federal match.
And I understand the portions of the project part of it, but the funding formula that we're talking about, and I understood that we had to have some sort of formula in place that guaranteed that we had money in place to match that federal funding. And are we on a pathway to where we may have that guaranteed, but it's not going to be guaranteed in the time frame that's required for us to even get the feds to consider giving us that money if it's still available after this bunch of bills that are going through Congress go through?
That is another issue of the risk that I was mentioning earlier. It is a risk.
Any other questions or comments? And I'll say one more, because we talked about this yesterday, about the $31 million that you have in the budget to reimburse Sparks for the North Truckee drain. Sparks is under the impression that you're going to make us whole on the whole project, which is, I'm guessing, $75 million. So we need to get everybody together and figure this out, because the citizens of Sparks paid for that portion of the flood project, was the North Truckee drain. They've been paying for it, and we just bonded the last phase so we can get it together, because if that phase wasn't put in, it's not connected, it doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Looking for a motion to accept the report.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. Number 3, Eric, discussion and update on the demolition of the property of 5205 Mill Street.
All right, good morning. Eric Sheets for the record. Again, I come to you with good news. Actually, Chair, I think, will be very pleased with this, as a lot of longstanding members of the board have or will be. But basically, we have the Excel building demolished. So that's the good news. We've spent quite a bit of money over the years on maintenance and watering of the grass, and there's been vagrants that have gone in, and there's been some issues with maintenance, but now we don't have to take care of that. So that's a good thing. In regards to the budget and schedule, we actually completed the project under budget. We didn't even touch the contingency, so that was pretty nice. We did have bids that were 2 and 3 times what we ended up actually paying for it, and really we had no issues. The only real thing that came up was the emergency agencies. Emergency personnel agencies asked for extra time to do final demolition training, explosive training, things like that. So we did grant that to them, as I mentioned last time. But basically, everybody got something out of it, and now we have a slab. I am gonna still put bollards up around the entries, going around the property, just so we don't have drifters and whatnot going in there, or people dumping trash. And then also this spring, we'll still do some xeriscaping and drip systems to the trees. But otherwise, everything's looking good. I'll run through a few pictures if Danielle does mind helping me out, or do we have a remote? So this, again, is a old picture from 2011. It shows the building. The square footage of the building was actually just over 1 acre inside. So we'll say about 44,000 square feet. It's a pretty large structure. If we move forward. This is Olsesi Construction doing the demolition. You can see, for the most part, the exterior walls were concrete, and then you have some post and beam structure inside as well. To remove the building, they started from the inside, took care of the drywall, everything inside being electrical, anything that can be recycled in that manner. And then the final step was, once the whole interior was cleared, to remove the concrete walls. Again, just about everything that could be recycled was recycled, and you don't really want to mix the concrete with the other material, which is why you waited till the end to do the concrete. It also kind of creates a perimeter even further than the fence there that you see, just to kind of protect from adjacent looky-loos and whatnot. So again, we had no issues in regards to safety or any other things that were negative. Everything came out very positive, actually. If we can go forward again, this is just another picture. This was the main entrance that we used at the northeast. It just shows the exterior wall still up there, and that's about it. Moving forward again, you can see stuff coming down. One more time, please. They basically loaded up everything to go recycle what they could. And one more. This is the slab empty, and really not much to it. It's just nice and clean. And then one more, please. This is actually as of about a week and a half ago, and again, all you see is slab now. There's nothing I have to maintain, really. That is why we left the slab as well, so we don't have to deal with dust issues or weed issues until we get ready to do the overall park system, and talking with the parks, and give them the canvas that they can work on. So, any questions?
Any questions? Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Aldine, you and I talked about this. I don't know whether you were brought into the conversation, Mr. Sheets, but there was a request to utilize this parcel by Pat Cashel through the homeless shelter to put those mobile tiny homes on the slab in the interim. They recognize completely that the area floods, but I mean, it'd be a great place. There's there's bus lines right there on Mill Street. It could be a potential great site for transitional housing, and I think it would be appropriate for us, if we need to agendize this, Mr. Wolz, I'd like to make that request for us to just talk about letting them use it, and making it very clear that this is interim. We're not, it's not going to be a sort of forever place, but it certainly could serve the need. And I know that they were looking they had a problem because they had purchased a bunch of those tiny homes, and they're just like interim for Forest Service and et cetera. I think they bought them from the U.S. government, and so I think it'd be just a perfect place for it in the meantime.
Great.
As I recall, this was an issue from Commissioner Jung, is that right?
Commissioner Jung, she brought it to my attention, and then we talked about the site because I knew that this was going to be a pad, and so it was through Pat Cashel via Commissioner Jung.
For the director's information, in my attempts to get a hold of Commissioner Jung, I left the final message saying that we are ready to put this on our agenda as soon as I get a request from her to ask for that.
Okay.
And so if you want us to do that, we will move forward and do that. Have no problem with it.
Yeah, let me carry that ball then. I'll make that formal request to put it on the agenda to just talk about what our responsibilities would be, which would essentially be none. They'll be liable for the site. They'll have to have insurances put into place, of course, if there's any issues out there. And I personally see no problem with allowing them to use it for a period of time. I mean,
Do they have self-contained water?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
These are self-contained units.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. So yeah, they don't have to be plumbed or I don't know how they deal with power, but it's quite a simplistic, eloquent solution.
Mr. Bubsey?
Just continuing the conversation, because where this comes from is the transitional governing board. So myself, Commissioner Jung, and Councilman Dare serve on that for oversight of the Community Assistance Center. And there's been a lot of discussion about the need for some sort of temporary overflow while we're talking about building the overflow, while we're moving forward on building the overflow. And I'm not aware if the purchase was made or not on those modulars that were out in Winnemucca. That was a
I
man
thought you
camp.
said they had purchased.
Okay, my sense was that they weren't going to buy them until they had the site.
Oh, I
So
see.
this would
Okay.
be one.
My
This
bad.
would be one opportunity. However, the other discussion is the need, discussing actual tents. So a controlled environment, but tents nonetheless, with cots being some solution that could be looked at. So I would just support adding this to the agenda to get more information and try to figure it out, because for what it's worth, this is a temporary use that I think would be appropriate, and we are definitely in dire need as we're going into the winter here.
Any other questions or comments? Eric, I thought there was a water fill station on that property. Is that am I thinking the wrong property for trucks?
Just down the street on the end of North Edison, there is a Tumwa water fill station.
Okay, it's not on this property then.
Correct. It is just adjacent. We did not impact that. Actually, to also mention that there are still 2 properties at the end of North Edison as well. And part of our contract with the contractor was to make sure that there was no adverse impacts to those, because currently there is a lawsuit pending. So.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, we did not affect them. We did our job and we did it well.
Well, thank you. I drive by that 3 or 4 times a week, and I saw it coming down, and they cleaned it up pretty quick. It amazed me, so good job.
All right.
Any other comments, questions? Thanks, Eric. Appreciate
Thank
it. Okay, number 4, Technical Advisory Committee report and discussion. Joe, how you doing?
Good. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Good morning.
Joe Coudrier for the record. The TAC met on December 1st. Don't have any specific items. We did discuss various items that I wanted to bring before the board, but except for this one, you can anticipate that within the next couple months that Director Aldean will bring before you for consideration a potential contract for some design work at the Vista Narrows. So we are coordinating with the Flood Project Office such that at the time that comes before you, you'll have a recommendation from us on the technical side of that. And that's it. If you have any other thing that you'd like us to consider, we're here.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, looking for a motion to accept the report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Joe. Okay, financial items. A, presentation regarding a discussion of the auditor's financial and compliance reports and management comments for FYE 2017.
Mr. Chair, Lori had to step out for a moment.
Okay.
I know that she's not feeling well. Perhaps we could open item 5B.
Okay.
And address that, and perhaps she'll be back by.
Okay,
then,
not a problem.
if that's okay.
We'll skip A when she gets back, and then B is discussion and possible action to approve a new agreement for professional legal services with Kemper Crowe with a maximum total contract amount of $200,000, and this is Michael.
Yes. So item 5B is a new agreement with the law firm of Kemper Crowe. They have represented the flood project since 2010. They started with the county and have carried over to us. They have provided legal representation on the issues of rates and fees. They are the legal counsel that would actually be prosecuting the rate hearings when those are actually held. The new agreement was drafted for 2 reasons. One, to make it easier to track, since it was such an old agreement. We'd amended it on 6 different occasions, and so we were having a little trouble keeping track of how much money was actually remaining on that contract. Also, the fee rates had not changed since 2010, and there was a request to make some adjustments there because of inflation. The agreement is for 2 years with a contract maximum of $200,000. Mr. Takis's billable rates have increased from $315 per hour to $400 per hour, which is below the inflation rate for attorney's fees over that period of time. over the last 7 years, according to government statistics. And it's also well within what's considered a reasonable fee by the federal court in Nevada. So that was a reasonable request. Mr. Carlson's fees increased a little less. That would be from $315 to $375, and any associate fees have stayed within the same range that we had under the previous contract. So, if there are no
Okay.
other questions, if there are no
Mr.
questions.
Hartung?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to approve. I know I've worked with Camphor Kroll for a number of years. They're very, forthright agency. I have no issue with approving this contract.
Okay, I have a motion. And a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Michael. Lori, are you going to be able to? Okay, come on down then. We'll go back to 5A. I think you guys are a den of sickness over there. I wish you'd talk from the back of the room so we don't get anything.
I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad at all. It's just other
Okay.
things. The audit for the fiscal year end June 30th, 2017 was completed in September. And in your packet, you have the TURFMA's financial statements and supplementary information for the year. We also have David Shaper, director from Bernard Vogler and Company, here to present the Auditors Report. And as you will soon hear from Mr. Shafer, TURFMA's financial reporting earned an unmodified opinion with no audit-related findings. And this is the highest form of opinion available from an auditor. And it indicates that the financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects, and that there were no instances of nonconformity with audit criteria or opportunities for improvement. Before I invite him up, I'll give you an overview of TURFMA's financial activity for the year by briefly reviewing 6 points of information. First of all, I'll start with the general fund balance, and that is on page 10 of the report, if you would like to look at that. It's the left column at the bottom, and you'll see that TURFMA's general fund had a total fund balance of $17.4 million as of the close of the year. And you'll also notice that there are 4 components of the fund balance. First is non-spendable, $182,298. And this represents amounts that cannot be spent because they are not in a spendable form, such as the interlocal community agreement reserve that's held by Washoe County, the prepaid expenditures, including the annual insurance premium, and the security deposit on the office. The next line is $932,000. It's the committed fund balance. This is the amount that has been constrained by formal board action at previous meetings. And some examples of that would be contracts with lobbyists, outside legal counsel, engineering firms, and other consultants and contractors. The third category is $7.9 million in assigned fund balance, and this amount is the total of the net change in fund balance that we budgeted for fiscal year 18, as well as the funds set aside for the various, we call them reserves, but they're really assignments, the assignments for operations, emergency repair and replacement, long-term capital replacement, and insurance deductible. And the last category is unassigned fund balance. And there are $8.4 million in this classification, and it represents 48% of the total fund balance. And the significance of this designation is to quantify available dollars that have not otherwise been restricted, committed, or assigned for any other purposes. And the total of the committed, assigned, and unassigned fund balance categories is called the unrestricted portion of the fund balance, and it's equivalent to 605% of the fiscal year 17 general fund expenditures and transfers. In total, the fund balance increased by $5.2 million over the prior year, and this was primarily due to there being no transfers to the capital fund, the capital projects fund. And though projects were budgeted for the year, they were postponed so that the budgeted funds could be reallocated in fiscal year 2018 for the locally preferred plan and other similar uses. On page 8 of the report, you'll see the statement of net position, which shows the total assets less liabilities to calculate the total net worth of the authority as of the end of the year. And the report shows at the bottom that the total net position is $68.2 million. That net position is broken down into 3 categories, as you can see. First is net investment in capital assets of $50.9 million, and this represents land, buildings, improvements, intangibles, infrastructure, and construction in progress that is in the possession of TRFMA. During 2017, there were no additions. However, the total was reduced by depreciation, a total of just about $101,000. The second of the 3 categories, restricted for capital projects, in the case of the authority, represents the fund balance of the capital projects fund. As you know, we keep that very low. We just pretty much fund it as money is needed. We transfer them funds from the general fund, and as I mentioned, in 2017, we made no transfers, so that's why it's so low. The last is unrestricted net position, which has a total of $17.3 million, and for TRFMA, this is the total, as I mentioned before, of committed, assigned, and unassigned portions of the general fund balance. So you've seen that number before, and that's what's there. Moving up the page a little bit to from net position to liabilities, you'll see there's 2 sections, current liabilities. These are bills and commitments considered current and payable within a year after the date of the financial statements. And the next category, non-current liabilities, are due after a year. And at this time, TRFMA has not issued any debt or entered into any major long-term commitments, so it's not a very large number. Basically, it's just a few small liabilities attributable to accrued sick leave benefits earned and payable to eligible employees at termination. That's about $18,000. Home elevation deposits of $7,500, and the Reno Sparks Indian Colony revolving cash fund of $5,000. Moving up to the top of the page, the authority reports as of the end of the year, it had $17.3 million in total cash and investments. Of this amount, $17,299,524, or 99.8% of that total, was on deposit with Washoe County's investment fund. And that fund is in the form of investments authorized by Nevada revised statutes and TRFMA's board policy. Turning to revenue, the primary source of revenue for TRFMA, as you know, is net sales tax proceeds. They are collected and distributed by Washoe County according to NRS Chapter 377B. And this revenue source is called net sales proceeds because, as you know, the sales tax are reduced by the debt service that is paid to Washoe County for the bonds they issued prior to the JPA being officially formed. So each month, what that virtually means is that each month the sales tax collections are reduced by the annualized amount split by 12 of debt service to Washoe County, and the difference is deposited to TRFMA. I'm mentioning this equation because it is important when I say that the net sales tax proceeds increased by 20.1% in fiscal year 17. So it wasn't all from sales tax proceeds. About just a little over 8% was due to increased sales tax revenue, but the other 11.8% was due to the refinancing of debt in 2016. So we saved on interest. Finally, I'll turn to the budget. There were no budget adjustments or augmentations made to either the general fund or the capital projects fund. The most significant budget variation was the one I mentioned. There were no transfers from the general fund to the capital projects fund. So that was a big savings to the bottom line. There also were notable variations in budgeted services and supplies, which reflected the slowdown in the flood project expenditures, pending the finalization of the local rate plan and project implementation studies. So all revenue sources exceeded budget except investment income, which was pretty minor. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Lori, on the vehicles, $25,964, is that the value of our vehicles, or is that what we owe, or?
That is what we had invested in them when we actually became an agency.
Okay.
They cost more than that, but that was recorded in Washoe County.
Okay.
When they transferred to us, that was their value.
Okay.
And so then down in depreciation, accumulated depreciation, they've been written down. You just can't identify it individually there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Lori? Okay.
All right, with that, then I will ask David Schaefer, he's the director at Bernard Vogler, who works with us on our audit, to come forward and present the auditor's report on the financial statements and on internal control and compliance, and any other comments he might offer you.
Welcome, David. Come on down.
Hello, I'm David Schopper, a director with Bernard Vogler and Company, the accounting firm that audited TURFMA, and I helped perform the audit. So Lori went over most of the financial details, so I'll just go over the auditor's report, and that would be on page 1. So, as Lori stated, our opinion was an unmodified opinion, which is the clean opinion, which states that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material aspects with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. And that's on there, page 1 on the bottom. And this also describes our responsibility in planning and performing the audit. And then on page 2, it also references other reporting required by government auditing standards, and this references the report on internal control and compliance, which is on page 30 to 31. And this, to summarize this report, it states that we don't express an opinion on internal controls, but we identified no internal control deficiencies and no non-compliance with laws, contracts, or grant agreements. So those, and then we also provided to the board of directors, and I think you have it in front of you, is a kind of a management letter that's directed to the board. It's not in the agenda. And this just describes that we didn't encounter any significant difficulties during the audit. It describes our responsibility, which I've pretty much summarized, that there were no significant changes in accounting policies during the year. The real only estimate in the financial statements is the depreciation expense. We found no misstatements identified as the result of our audit procedures, and there were no uncorrected misstatements identified during our audit, and there was really no significant findings or issues. We do mention to look that we deem 2 disclosures as particularly sensitive, and that is note 8 commitments and note 11 contingencies. And note 11 is described on the contingency note is on page 25. And that just states that if all if the construction phase of the flood management project is gone through, then the authority could possibly owe or pay to the United States Army Corps of Engineers $5.6 million for TURFMA's share of the sunk costs that the Corps of Engineers has incurred for the planning phase. But it's contingent on many variables going forward, so that amount isn't reflected in the financial statements. So is there any questions on the audit or numbers?
Questions or comments? Okay, looking for a motion to accept the reports. So move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, C, monthly report on the authority's financial status and related financial activities. Lori.
You have several financial reports in front of you. I'll just address October, if that's all right with you. If you have questions about any of the other months, I'll be more than happy to address them. The balance sheet for the general fund and capital projects fund as of October 31st does not show any unusual activity or anything of merit worth mentioning. Everything is on track and is balanced. As for the statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance for both the general fund and the capital projects, all expenditures are well within the budget range, and salaries are on track with where we should be at this point in the year, and that being a larger number. I thought I'd mention that. Professional services, we're about a third of the way through the year, and you'll see we're just a little bit under a third of the way. That was a joke. It's a lot of the way. There's a lot of professional services that might be addressed there. And are you not finding the October?
I don't have the report. Does anybody else? Okay, he's got one. Yeah, I don't have one. I just got the encumbrance. It's okay.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's right.
But we'll get that to you.
Where was it?
Because there should be several months since we have not had board meetings. There should be quite a few there.
Okay, I found it. Got it.
Okay, good. So actually, the professional services, we do have a lot of contracts that are left to actually utilize during the remainder of the year, which is not unusual for where we are. And if you have any questions about either of those or any of the preceding months, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, look for a motion to accept the report. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks. And then
Thank
we'll
you.
move on to D.
D is the summary of outstanding encumbrances and other agreements, and this is the format you've seen the last few months. There's not a significant change. There's an addition of a small purchase order of $2,200 for a video production. And if you have any questions about any of these items, I'd be happy to address those.
Any questions, comments? And looking for motion to accept that report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks,
Thank
Lori.
you.
Hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Okay, number 6, board member comments. Any comments or requests? You know, I would be curious in a couple things, Michael. First of all, for those tiny houses, mini houses they're talking about, would that be the same thing as when Kelly wanted to move Bristlecone into another section of the flood project? I mean, we'd have to protect ourselves with held harmless.
If I understand what Commissioner Hartung's comments on that, it would be a temporary use.
Okay.
And that they would not be permanent structures. So that was the difference. I think that
Okay.
the effort to move the Bristlecone building, they were looking for a permanent location. So that would be more problematic.
Yeah, these are, for lack of a better term, and this is not spoken in the pejorative, it's like a modified cargo container.
Okay,
Easy
okay.
to move.
Just curious. Now, my other question is, if this does not pass on the ballot and this committee goes away, we have all this property out there. What do we do? Does it revert back to the entities, or, and they can't really build in it because it's a flood zone?
The short answer would be, is you would have to decide. And I believe that that would require the ICA to be changed. There'd probably be a new agreement required. So you would have to have a unanimous decision on what to do with that property, and then each of the governing entities, Reno, Sparks, and the county, would also have to come to agreement on that. So it would be a
Complicated.
process
Yeah.
to make that decision. I'm sure you'd all come to an agreement. And,
Okay.
but that would be the process.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would like to add, though, that if, let's say the tax was put on the ballot and rejected, there are still a number of opportunities and I would say ideas that we could push to the board and let the board consider and still be able to acquire a certain amount of flood protection with our current status. And also, we could take a different tactic during our negotiation with the federal government, that maybe perhaps we slow the construction schedule down, use our 1/8 cent judiciously, and also maybe then bring a fee in at the appropriate time. And there are still avenues out there. This is not a, once, if they vote it down, the project goes away and we all go home. It's not that type of a deal.
Okay. Good, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to open up the public comment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority, and without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.